All right, everybody, this is part 2 of our Canterbury Tales prologue presentation. So if you did not watch part 1 or you did not go over part 1 in class, please make sure you do that before going on to this presentation here. Also, make sure you are filling out your notes while you are watching this. The notes are 25 points, and you need to have a decent amount of information on each slide on your note sheet in order to receive full credit. So please make sure you are taking your notes while you are watching this presentation. So we left off on the monk last time, and I won't review him over again just because I went over it in good detail on the last presentation. So I'm going to go on to the next one. So now we have the friar. The friar is jolly, merry, very festive, but ironically notoriously evil and cunning. So potentially some irony for the friar there. He oftentimes married off girls after he had gotten them into trouble, and he charged people to hear their confessions. And the more you paid, the more essentially the more sins that you had forgiven. So he was cheating people out of their money. He acted like he was a good guy, but he really wasn't. He knew all of the taverns, innkeepers, and barmaids. However, he did not affiliate himself with the sick or the needy because he thought that they were scum, and he thought that they were below them. He begged from poor widows who had next to nothing for money because he was very selfish and wanted any money that he could get his hands on. He dressed with expensive fabrics, and he also was portrayed as being overweight. So he demonstrates a lot of the different sins that we see in the 7 deadly sins. You could argue that he demonstrates pride, gluttony, sloth, envy, greed, and lust. So 6 out of the 7 deadly sins portrayed in one character is a lot. But he was not a good guy. He acted like he was good, but he was not good. He did anything for money. He really trampled over people who he thought that were below him. So he is someone to keep an eye out when we read the story in terms of his intentions of evil that go along throughout the Canterbury Tales. And then we have the merchant. He convinces everyone that he was an expert in finance, but he was actually very much in debt. So some good irony for you there. A lot of these characters portrayed different types of irony. His was the fact that he convinced everybody that he was good with money, but he was actually in a lot of debt himself. He was a very solemn and serious guy. He was intelligent despite his debt issues and very cunning at the same time. He sets up a safety patrol at the English Channel, safety for tradesmen. There should be sea police, but there's not. So again, affiliates himself with different government measures and believes himself to be very intelligent. However, he is very prideful in this. So he's not very humble when it comes to him demonstrating his intelligence or the fact that he believes he is good with money. So he can demonstrate the sins of pride and greed. However, he is very diligent and he does work hard in some sense. So he can portray the corresponding virtue of diligence, but he does portray greed definitely, and this element of pride as well, because he is not very humble in his expression of his intelligence or his control over other people. So then we have the cleric, very, very thin, almost looks sickly or underfed, and does not have very expensive or fancy clothing by any means. He does have 20 books with him, which in this time period, books were very expensive, so this is to be considered a small fortune. However, he took from his friends, and in return, he prayed for them. So some element of satire or irony there in the fact that he took the books from them, and in return, he decided he was going to pray for them. He hasn't sought any secular employment, which means any employment away from the church or away from religion, because he is still studying in his studies of religion. He doesn't talk very often, but when he does, he talks with a lot of dignity and moral virtue. So he is he expresses great morals and is virtuous in that type of way. However, he does demonstrate this sin of sloth, meaning he is not a very hard worker. He's taking his sweet time, but he does demonstrate a lot of kindness and humility, or being humble as well. So definitely not one of the most evil characters that we'll meet, or one of the mean characters that you'll meet. However, he does seem to take his time with everything that he's doing. So then we have the sergeant at the law. The sergeant means that he had to practice law with distinction for at least 16 years. This was a very big deal during this time period. Not a lot of people were able to achieve that. He was very intelligent and knew every law that ever existed, every judgment, every case, every crime. He was very well versed in law. He was occasionally appointed by the king to serve as a judge on cases, which again is a very big deal for this time period. He demonstrated his affluence in his clothes. He wore very expensive silk, a party-colored coat, which again is a symbol of wealth and distinction. He is very prideful, though. He does know that he is a distinguished person, and he doesn't demonstrate any type of humility or being humble in this sense. So although he is very intelligent and everybody can recognize that, he also knows that he's intelligent, and he's very prideful of this fact. The Franklin, who is supposed to be an example of a baron, which again is a very high-ranking person of this time period. He is a wealthy landowner, but not of noble birth. Remember, during this time period, who you were born from was a very big deal, and who your parents were and who your family was. That all kind of decided your wealth and your status in life. Pleasure was his priority, and he followed the philosophy of Epicurus, which means pleasure with moderation. He entertained in a very lavish manner, which means he did not hold back on demonstrating his money. He acted as a sheriff, checking and auditing people's property and their wealth as well. He, again, is another character that demonstrates this aspect of pride, wrath as well. There's a point up there that says angry at a cook when food was not prepared. He was not very patient with people. Gluttony in the terms of money and accumulating different wealth, and not being able, or not really sharing with other people. Although it does mention charity there at the bottom, in terms of him offering his help to others, but not necessarily his money. So very wealthy, prideful, not very patient with other people, and did like to live a very lavish lifestyle. So then you have the guildsmen. These are the people who were involved in different types of trades at the time period. So they all belong to a type of guild, associations of tradesmen, which would essentially today be a union. And they did hold some type of power in this time period as well. Trades were very valued during the Middle Ages. So they had a decent say in their life and also in their ranking as well. They did dress very luxuriously, which was a symbol of their prestige and their honor at the time period, because again, trades were very distinguished and held at a high regard in the Middle Ages. Their wives are seen as demanding and controlling. They always want servants to carry their mantles and trains like queens. So their wives are portrayed as being maybe a little bit prideful. It says at the bottom there, pride and envious of the upper class, because although they are dressed to luxury and they do have certain elements of luxury, they are not considered to be the upper class just yet. They are middle upper, but not associated with people like knights or barons in that sense. Diligent in terms of the people who did belong to the guild and were tradesmen did work very hard. So they are associated with hard work and consistently working throughout their lifetime. However, their wives definitely portray this element of pridefulness and potentially a little bit of envy for people who are in the upper class and acting as if they are in the upper class themselves. And the men of the guild, too, were also demonstrated their prestige, their honor, and their wealth through their dress and showing people that, you know, they were a part of something that was better than the lower class. So this can be perceived as showing as a bit prideful. So then we have the cook. He was a servant to the haberdasher, dyer, carpenter, weaver. Essentially, he was the servant to the guildsmen. He was a very good cook. No one can cook like him. He was a drunk, though, which is maybe what made him a good cook, or what made him think he was a good cook. He mentions multiple times an open sore on the knee, and we'll go over the irony of that once we start reading. He is gluttonous, especially in terms of his drinking. He is seen as a very satirical character in the Canterbury Tales. He is supposed to be somewhat funny. He is diligent in his cooking, though, and he does take pride in his cooking, and he does work hard. He's just a little bit gluttonous in terms of his drinking habits and also in the food that he prepares. Then we have the skipper. He's from Dartmouth, known for his piracy and brutality of its sailors. So you can tell that he's maybe not the nicest guy. He stole wine while he was in Bordeaux, ignored his conscience. He's very immoral. He is well tanned, though, as a point made in there, and a little rough looking around the edges. He is not a good guy. He kills all of his prisoners and has a very, very bad temper. So he was respected in the aspect of he had great knowledge of the seas and of sailing, but again, not a nice guy. He did demonstrate a lot of wrath and greed, of course, but you could make the argument that he was diligent to a certain aspect because he did know the seas really well, and he was a trusted person when it came to knowledge of sailing. But again, not a good guy, was not very nice to other people, as you can tell when it says kills all his prisoners, and very angry towards anybody who tried to get in his way. So our last one here is the doctor. During this time period, doctors used astronomy and astrology, meaning they used patients' horoscopes for information on how to treat them. This might not have been universal, but in terms of the doctor that we are going to be reading about in the Canterbury Tales, he did use astrology or his patient's horoscope in terms of information on how to treat them. He was considered to be a good doctor. He did use apothecary, worked with a pharmacist to make more money off of people with the apothecary. So again, using that horoscope and then working with the pharmacist to get people to buy different things from the apothecary. Not excessive in his own life and a very healthy person. He was more materialistic, though, not a religious person as well. And he made a lot of money during the plague. So he was focused on his money, as many people were during this time period. So he is a bit materialistic, and at the bottom there it says greed and potentially pride. He doesn't demonstrate a lot of pride, which is why there is a question mark there, because he's not one of those people who thinks that he knows absolutely everything. But because he is a doctor and he has knowledge on how to treat sick people, he knows that he has the intelligence to convince other people that he knows what he's talking about. Okay, good. So this is all for video 2. I will be making one other video for the prologue presentation. Make sure you take notes and make sure that you watch the 3rd video as well.